think about it, there really hasn't been a movie that even comes close to addressing everything.
Thank you so much for this.
Would you believe the guy who became the internet's famous daddy used to play dead bodies on crime shows? Like, legit, zipped up in a TV morgue while some detective said, "Poor kid never stood a chance." Yeah, that was Pedro Pascal's Hollywood debut. Fast forward a couple of decades, and he's the masked bounty hunter in The Mandalorian, the broken dad in The Last of Us, and the only man alive who can make the internet collectively lose its mind just by smiling in an interview. But here's the thing. For most of his life, nobody even noticed he was there. Think about it. The whole of his appearance in The Mandalorian, we didn't even get to see him. Heck, this man built an empire on being invisible. For years, he was the definition of a background blur. The, "Hey, isn't that guy from that thing?" dude. Most of the roles he was in before he became famous were the blink and you'd miss him kind of gigs. He was a TV ghost who was drifting in, dying quick, and gone before the credits rolled. Nobody knew his name, nobody cared. Hollywood just kept slotting him in as the ethnically vague guy number 3. And that's the paradox, because this man who spent half his career unseen became the face of modern pop culture. The quietest rise in Hollywood history. One minute, he's scraping rent together in New York. The next, he's pulling $600,000 an episode, with fans making thirst edits of him drinking coffee. So yeah, would you believe the guy who once couldn't get a callback is now Disney's masked moneymaker and HBO's emotional wrecking ball? Stick around, cause this story, it's not just about fame. It's about how Pedro Pascal went from invisible extra to unstoppable icon without ever taking off the armor that made him famous. You see, before the lights, the helmet, or Hollywood even knew his name, Pedro Pascal was a little kid from Chile whose life started like something out of a movie, but not the happy kind. His parents were political rebels, fighting against a dictatorship that didn't exactly hand out freedom of speech flyers, if you know what I mean. So when things got a bit too dangerous to raise a family, they packed up and dipped. They fled Chile, bounced around, and finally landed in the US, where little Pedro grew up trying to make sense of a world that didn't exactly feel like his. Of course, he had to deal with the new language barrier and a new society. All this while your parents are trying to make sure that you've got something on the table. That kind of mess toughens you up early and can either make or mar you. But since Pedro wasn't born into red carpet and fancy premieres, especially watching his peeps grind hard to survive, he just knew he had to make it, especially when you remember that survival was all he ever knew. However, in his search for meaning to life, Pedro was able to find an infinity to fantasy. From the jump, he was obsessed with stories. So he did what any kid like that would do. He got into the arts. And let's not forget that he wasn't chasing fame or something. All our guy wanted was just to survive. And he began soaking in stuff like Shakespeare, old movies, theater, you name it. But what's weird is that while other kids were dreaming about being astronauts or athletes, Pedro was out here memorizing monologues. And when he finally hit high school, boom, acting found him. The stage became his safe space. The one place he could be loud, expressive, and seen. But yo, loving the arts or drama and being talented doesn't mean you get a free pass. When he made it to New York to study acting, life hit him like a ton of bricks. He saw the reality of making it to the top, and one of it was ignoring the rat race. But how was he supposed to do that when rent was due, money was gone, and the city didn't care how much heart you had? It chewed you up anyway. Regardless, Pedro fought on and soon became the odd one out amongst his peers. Teachers couldn't pronounce his name right, casting directors kept telling him he was too ethnic. The agents, who could also fit him into roles, had a hard time placing him as he didn't fit the conventional Latino narrative and wasn't even white enough to act the white roles. But instead of folding, Pedro leaned in. He figured, if y'all don't got a box for me, I'll build my own. That's when the grind really started, as he got in on tiny auditions, student plays, and off-Broadway stuff that nobody saw. Most times, he'd show up, do his thing, and disappear like a ghost with talent. But still, he got nothing out of all this effort, and it just seemed like he was going to be just like every other actor out there that never made it to the big screens. You see, with all of the disappointments he faced, most people would have quit, but not Pedro. Every rejection just sharpened his edge and made him hungrier. He knew that he wasn't chasing the applause, rather that he was building up himself and waiting for that one door to crack open. And as we all know, That's the thing about invisible beginnings. They don't look glamorous. But that's where the fire starts, because before Pedro Pascal became the world's most beloved badass, he was just another dreamer in New York who was broke, determined, and ready to make the world see what it had been sleeping on. To get a clearer picture of how Pedro started, we have to take a trip back to the 1990s. This was a time when the world was broke. It was a time when everyone and their grandma wanted to be an actor. So the auditions were usually filled up with old-timers and newbies wanting a shot on the screen. And Pedro was part of that ensemble as he was going through his ghost phase, where he was literally unknown. But he did get some gigs, and yes, you didn't know it was him at that time. He was that nameless cop on Law & Order, the paramedic who showed up for 10 seconds before the scene cut away, the ethnically ambiguous guy walking past the camera. Dude even played a dead body once. Yeah, that was the gig, literally lying still while someone else got all the lines. But then, his big moment came with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Y'all remember that corny-ass vampire show? Yeah, well, he got the role as a college dude named Eddie, who gets a few lines off, smiles at Buffy, and boom, 5 minutes later, he's a vampire, dies, and the credits roll. It's so funny because at that point, his career highlight lasted shorter than a TikTok. But hey, that's how it went back then. Small parts, smaller paychecks, rinse and repeat. But all this couldn't pay the bills, especially in a very expensive New York. So Pedro was usually bartending and pulling shifts to keep the lights on. Audition after audition, rejection after rejection. Hollywood had him in this loop of, you're good, but not quite what we're looking for. Man probably heard that phrase more than his own name. But here's where it gets interesting. After years of not moving anywhere, Pedro started studying people. Like, really studying them. The customers at his bar, the casting directors who wouldn't call back, and the actors who did make it. He also learned how to blend in, how to read a room, how to disappear when he needed to, and shine when the spotlight finally hit. That invisibility everyone else saw as a curse was now his ultimate weapon. For real, think about it. All those nameless and faceless roles forced him to find depth in silence. So he wasn't that actor that gave the flashy lines or hero monologues. Instead, he learned how to use just his presence. Y'all know that quiet intensity, the same one that Cillian Murphy has? For Pedro, he learned the hard way to layer his emotion under control. Funny enough, that is exactly what later made him the guy for those complex and stoic roles. But as the years rolled by, he stayed true to his dreams and became the man we all see. Now, let's fast forward to 2014. And the TV series Game of Thrones has taken the planet by storm. Millions of viewers were tuning in weekly to watch this HBO fantasy that was so addictive. With lots of big names already on the rise from the show, people expected more stars to be born. Now here came the break that Pedro Pascal needed to up his career. In an episode, Pedro was introduced into the fantasy show as Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne. This character, as many of us remember, was a sexy, vengeful prince with charm for days and a chip on his shoulder. The role was supposed to be a small, maybe a season tops, but Pedro, man, made it legendary. So here's how it happened. You see, Pedro didn't audition for the role in person, as he had only sent in a tape. Now this was a lucky move for an actor that was just breaking out, but what the producers didn't expect was Pedro dripping in raw, magnetic confidence. And that was the moment the background ghost got noticed. Then came the episodes. Oberyn strolling into King's Landing like he owned the place, talking slick, fighting smoother, and stealing every damn scene. He wasn't on screen long, but when he was, the whole show felt like it revolved around him. Fans went nuts with the appeal he was giving, and people soon lost their minds and began churning out memes and fan art. And suddenly, the guy that no one knew was everywhere. But what really helped him win over the fans worldwide is the fight with the Mountain. Man, if you know, you know. It's brutal, unforgettable, and somehow poetic. And when Oberyn dies, can't lie, people were shocked. Like, this character was one of the sane ones in a show filled with a bunch of egotistical and batshit crazy individuals. Well, that performance, the swagger, the emotion, the pain, it hit differently. You could feel years of rejection, frustration, hunger bleeding through that role. It wasn't just acting, it was a release. And now, Hollywood finally saw what the rest of us were missing. The background guy had movie star energy, and they couldn't ignore it anymore. By the time the dust settled, Pedro's name was trending, his face was everywhere, and that blink and you miss it actor had become a breakout icon. The man who spent half his career playing corpses had just brought one of the most alive characters in TV history to the screen. and the world was finally watching. The ghost had stepped into the light, and he wasn't fading this time. When Oberyn Martell's head hit the floor, Pedro Pascal's career finally stood up. The Red Viper might have died a brutal death, but for Pedro, that was the moment life cracked open. Hollywood, for the first time, said his name out loud and didn't forget it the next day. The man who spent 2 decades hustling in the background was suddenly in the middle of the spotlight, and this time it wasn't flickering. Right after Game of Thrones, he slid straight into Narcos, and let me tell you, that move was genius. From a flashy, seductive prince to a weary DEA agent chasing cartels across Colombia, it showed he wasn't just a one-role wonder. Pedro didn't come to play a type, he came to build a range. Narcos had that quiet tension, that moral messiness, that line between good guy and bad guy so blurred you almost forgot who was who. And that's where Pedro thrived. He gave Javier Pena that cool-headed, seen-it-all energy that made you believe this man had stared into the dark and didn't flinch. What made it hit even harder was how real it felt. His bilingual background? That was gold! He wasn't some Hollywood dude pretending to speak Spanish with subtitles, carrying him through. Nah, Pedro was fluent in both worlds. He could move from English to Spanish mid-sentence just like real people do, just like his characters did. He belonged in both hemispheres. Latin America saw him as one of their own, finally getting his due, and Hollywood saw a leading man who could speak to audiences everywhere. And man, while his acting was turning heads, the internet was falling in love. Like, not just fan appreciation, full-blown obsession. Tumblr edits, Twitter threads, TikTok fan cams, Pedro Pascal became a digital religion. Fans dubbed him the Internet Daddy, and it just stuck. Every photo, every interview, every moment he smiled like he didn't know he was famous turned into a meme. It wasn't your usual Hollywood type, it was warmth, real connection that you can sit and have a drink with this dude energy. Part of that was his humor. Pedro never moved like a guy who made it. He moved like a guy who still can't believe it worked. He clowned himself in interviews, rolled his eyes when people called him sexy, giggled through talk shows like a man genuinely enjoying the absurdity of it all. That humility, that goofy grin, that self-awareness, it was the antidote to Hollywood ego. You could tell those years of rejection didn't harden him, they humbled him. By the time awards season hit, red carpets were lighting up with flashes, stylists, and actors putting on their serious looks. Then there's Pedro, smiling like he had just snuck into the party. Reporters would ask about fame, and he'd shrug it off like, yeah, I just kinda showed up. But underneath the charm, you could feel the gratitude. The man had been invisible for half his career. Now every camera wanted him, and instead of flexing, he said thank you. From Thrones to Narcos, from anonymity to adoration. Pedro Pascal had gone from ghost to god tier. What made him different was that he didn't lose his soul in the spotlight. Yeah, that was very easy to do in Hollywood. Fame found him, but it didn't change the way he looked at the world. In fact, it all just reminded him how long it took to be seen, and that's why he never forgot to look back at those still waiting in the shadows. Now, here's the twist of all twists. After 2 decades clawing his way out of invisibility, Pedro finally hits The Mandalorian in 2019, the role that launches him into superstardom. And he's back to being hidden again. Helmet on, face off, the dude's biggest job turns him into a ghost all over, but this time, on his terms. Think about it. Pedro's whole career was about being unseen, about people overlooking him. But then he becomes the most famous man you still can't see. That's poetic, man. Disney drops The Mandalorian, and instantly it's a hit. Part Western, part space epic, all mystery. The whole galaxy's obsessed with Baby Yoda, but it's the man under the metal that makes the show tick. Pedro brought that quiet fire, that steady calm. Every line he delivered sounded like it came from someone who's lived 10 lives and lost in all of them. And get this, most of the time, Pedro wasn't even in the suit. Yeah, a couple of stunt doubles handled the physical stuff, while Pedro came in later to record the dialogue. But here's the thing, it didn't matter. That voice, that tone, that energy, it carried everything. The creators said they picked him not because of his face, but because his voice had soul. It wasn't just acting, it was presence. The man could whisper a single line and make you feel like he just handed you the morale of the entire galaxy. By season 3, he's pulling around $600,000 per episode, which is straight up elite TV money. But that puts him in the same salary orbit as legends like the Friends cast at their peak, or Bryan Cranston in his Breaking Bad prime. The man who once had to borrow rent money was now making six figures every time he said, "This is the way." This is what we could call a full circle moment. And you know what's crazy? He didn't flex. No flashy cars, no wild shopping sprees, no tabloid scandals. Let's be honest, he's a better man than me. All he did was buy himself a quiet place, some comfort, and some peace. This was the same dude who'd been sleeping on couches, but now had space to breathe. But he didn't start acting brand new. He was still Pedro, the chill, funny, and self-aware dude who just happened to be sitting on a Star Wars empire. Symbolically, the Mandalorian was like the perfect metaphor for his life. All those years of hiding, of being unseen, now turned into an art form. The mask wasn't a secret. The mask became power. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was mythic. The man behind the helmet wasn't a secret. He was a legend. And let's talk about that dad energy, because fans didn't just see Mando as a bounty hunter. Rather, they saw him as a protector, a father figure, someone with that mix of toughness and warmth. But think about it. Isn't it funny how Pedro's career always gravitates towards roles like that? You know, the one where he protects, endures, and loves without saying it out loud. It's also that emotional weight he carries, that realness that cuts through the sci-fi and makes you feel something human under all that armor. By now, awards are stacking, studios are calling, his name's printed next to powerhouse projects, and through it all, he's just vibing. The Mandalorian turned him from cult favorite to global phenomenon. But Pedro handled it like a man who already knew what it meant to be unseen. Fame doesn't scare him, because he knows the opposite of fame too well. He once said, "If I take the helmet off, it's not the same character." Maybe he meant more than just Star Wars. Maybe what he really meant was, I've learned to wear my mask when I need to, but I never forget who I am underneath. Pedro Pascal is now a millionaire you can't see, the everyman who became myth. He didn't just survive the grind, he mastered it. And the beauty of it all? He made being hidden look like the brightest spotlight in Hollywood. By 2023, Pedro Pascal finally dropped the helmet. No armor, no visor, no metal shell between him and the audience. Just raw, unfiltered humanity. And all this came with one of the most popular TV shows, The Last of Us. Now, this wasn't just another gig. It was a full circle moment. The emotional payoff for every invisible year he'd eaten alive in the background. In The Last of Us, Pedro steps into Joel's battered boots, a man who's lost everything and still wakes up each morning with something left to protect. And this shows that he has more to give than acting because he went all in. He wore the semblance of Joel, a messy and tired guy, and made it feel wholesome, and he nailed it with perfection. He was also able to bring his past experiences into this role. You know, after his mother died early in his life, her absence left scars that never quite healed. You can see it in his eyes when Joel hesitates, when he's torn between surviving and living. It's personal, painfully so. That quiet ache, that fatherly guilt, that "I'll do anything for you" energy. It's not performative, but still he gives us a performance of a lifetime. It's Pedro reaching into his own history and pulling out every piece of grief he ever tried to bury. Many people who played the game say that he brought out the character they know and dramatized him perfectly. The critics couldn't get enough. Suddenly, the internet's daddy meme became Hollywood's emotional heavyweight. People were tweeting about sobbing through episodes like it was therapy. The Emmy buzz came fast, the Golden Globe nods followed, and suddenly, Pedro wasn't just a fandom favorite. He was respected. The world finally saw the depth behind the grin, the weight behind the memes. And the comparisons? Too easy to miss. The Mandalorian's Din Djarin, stoic protector under a mask. The Last of Us's Joel, more or less shattered survivor stripped bare. Two sides of the same coin, both trying to save a kid and both doing it for redemption. Except this time, Pedro didn't need a voice filter or a helmet to sell the pain. You could see every ounce of it right there, in 4K tears and trembling hands. Off-screen, he leaned right into the cultural moment, hosting Saturday Night Live, walking the Met Gala red carpet in a red coat that practically screamed icon energy, and still being that humble, awkward guy who laughs at his own jokes. The dude went from that guy who died on Game of Thrones to the guy everyone wanted to hug, meme, and cast in their dream roles. By the time the season wrapped, The Last of Us wasn't just another post-apocalyptic drama. It was a global phenomenon, and Pedro Pascal, he was the emotional core of it all. The internet melted, the critics swooned, and the industry that once said he didn't fit was now building shows around him. Here's the wild part. For a man who spent decades being invisible, his new problem became the intense visibility he was getting. We have to admit that Pedro Pascal isn't just famous now, he's everywhere. But unlike most stars who let fame go to their heads, he wears it like an old coat. Comfortable, slightly awkward, never flashy. He still laughs like a fan who can't believe he's here. Still thanks the crews before the cameras and shrugs off the whole adoration he's getting from fans with a grin that says, "Yeah, I know it's weird, but whatever makes you happy." It's all just a poetic paradox, because for 20 years, he was background noise. The extra, the guy with 2 lines, the dead body in episode 3. Now he's the face of vulnerability and perseverance, the symbol of everything Hollywood pretends to value, but rarely rewards. Patience, authenticity, heart. People don't just watch Pedro Pascal, they feel him. He's the reminder that good guys don't have to be perfect, that real strength doesn't mean shutting off your emotions. He's proof that you can fail for 2 decades straight and still blow up the world's biggest shows if you keep showing up. And the best part, he never let fame rewrite his history. He's not chasing blockbusters or spitting Hollywood jargon. He's still Pedro, the theater nerd from Chile who once got told he'd never make it, now sitting on top of 2 of the biggest franchises in pop culture. He represents the long game, the quiet grind, the art of staying invisible until the world's finally ready to see you. So yeah, it's funny that the guy who spent half his career hiding behind helmets, accents, and side roles didn't win by showing off. He won by being real.